Hello all and welcome. You're very, very welcome here to our second annual Retina International virtual conference. I might just ask everyone to please mute yourself as you enter into this meeting. Due to the nature of this meeting, we have opted for a meeting as opposed to a webinar. This allows us to do breakout rooms and increase the engagement, which is definitely our goal for this entire event. So please do get engaged. We hope you enjoy the many sessions and panels that we have over the next 2 days. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you now to Ms. Marina Sutter. So Marina is our interim chair of the Retina International Youth Council. And Marina is going to present to us on the Youth Council and provide us with an introduction. Before I do that, I would just like to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and it is also being live streamed via YouTube.
What do you think?
Thank you very much. It's just a reminder to please stay muted. If you would like to raise your hand to make any comments through, we invite you to use your keyboard shortcut, Alt-Y, to raise hand. And you can also find this function in the reactions control across the bottom bar. So Marina, I'm going to pass over to you. Marina, you're just on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome to everybody both in the Zoom and listening in on the live stream. As Fiona said, I'm the interim chair of the Youth Council, and it's been a dream. 1 year ago, we talked about founding a council. We talked about getting those officials elected, and today it's a reality. So let's have a look at why do we have a Youth Council? What is its function? And moreover, how can you get involved if you're interested? Next slide, please. So if you're not familiar, Retina International is a patient organization. We have many affiliates around the world, and it's our job to build capacity to help inform policy all around the world. And this means we take a very holistic approach to health. We don't just look at the biology or the dysfunction, we care about the implications. So as you can see on the slide, there is a grid. It's got 4 health domains. First of all, mental. Mental health is becoming more well-known. It's about our ability to manage and engage with our resourcing. How do we perceive the world? And then how do we react to the world? A lot of people are not aware that when you live with low vision, you deal with a lot more mental barriers. Things like greater fatigue when reading or certain activities like navigating. And this has very direct implications. This means that we are more prone to getting anxiety. We are more likely to develop depression. Then there is the physical realm. The physical is very well known. This is the biological dysfunction, the eye that does not work, the eye that cannot see. This we know how to deal with through technology. Then there is the third barrier, the third domain of health, which we often talk about and which is becoming more well known. This is social. This is our connection and relationship to the people and systems around us. For example, my social well-being is linked to my mother, my father, my friends, and my colleagues, even the health professionals who serve me. And what we do see, and what we have heard from people, is that during diagnosis and post-diagnosis, that people will isolate themselves, afraid of what is coming or afraid of how to tell those they love that something isn't working and they need more help. This directly feeds into our fourth and most unknown health dimension, spiritual. Now, spirituality has a number of definitions, but in terms of well-being and health, for right now, the operational definition we're going to be looking at is that spirituality or spiritual well-being is about identity. It's about the value sets that we hold. For example, I believe in good communication. I believe in integrity. And this directly has an effect on how I choose to interact with my systems. The system can be my family, my culture, or my country, to the level of politics even. This is where spiritual comes in play. And I'm very excited because the team has done a great job of including all 4 domains in our presentations over the following 2 days. So stay tuned for the personal panel on day 2. And please be aware that you need to be registered to participate, because these will not be recorded sessions. These will not be live streamed. So if you want to have a conversation with our youth council and get to know their lived experience and their tips and tricks, then get registered. Next slide, please. So how do we aim to achieve this? This seems a very lofty goal, but I don't think so. I believe that through the structure that we have developed and the people we have chosen, we will achieve this goal with flying colors. First and foremost, on this slide, there are 2 points of information. One is a table with a hierarchy. And on the other side, we have a list of bullet points, which I will touch on as we go through. On the top of our graph of our hierarchy is the Retina International Board. This is the board which directs and manages our movements. The Youth Council speaks with and interacts with the board. It is our duty to participate in and to help promote events and projects run by Retina International, such as surveys or this council, this youth event. And it's also for the purpose of building capacity, for informing that policy at the national level. And in order to achieve this, the Retina International Board has a lot of say, and they observe. And then we have our next layer down. We are looking at the elected officials. These are nominees from full member countries. They are nominated by the council members. Myself and my colleagues choose those who we think are most capable to carry out the functions needed. We have the chairperson, we have the vice chair, and we have secretary. One layer down, we have the council itself. The council is made up of volunteers, people nominated by their nations because they thought they were capable of carrying out these tasks. At this point in time, we have 8 countries involved. And out of these 8 countries, we have 14 nominees. On our final layer, we have the WG, the working groups. In order to promote the health and well-being of our council members and to ensure long-lasting success, we have decided to have subgroups, working groups, which enables our council members to raise their hand and say, yes, I'm interested in advocacy, or actually, I am quite interested in event management, or even social media. These working groups allow people to follow their passion, offer time when they have it, but also ensure that we are covering all the jobs, the projects that we want to, without causing or costing anybody more than necessary. So this structure not only enables us to reach all our goals and hit all our targets, but it means that we are looking after the health and well-being of everybody involved. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? Well, in July, we got started. We've had 2 official council meetings. We've had much more working group meetings for this youth conference. And part of that is that we are already starting to plan our future projects. We have some already in the pipeline. For example, the Retina International World Congress, we will be responsible for the youth program that takes place in person. But not only that, we are in the process of electing those 3 individuals, the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary. And once we've got that done, it's time for strategy. Not only do we care about the internal workings, we have already started participating in the advocacy realm of our function. We have attended a UN event, which is a UN action for including rare diseases, which is fantastic. And not only because it is advocacy, but it's all about working for future generations, young people like us speaking up for those who come after us. Next slide, please. So the question I have for you is, are you interested? Has anything I said sparked curiosity? Well, the way to get involved is to contact our executive team in Ireland. Through them, you can find out if there is a member organization near you. Through them, you can determine, are they a full member, a candidate member, or just an interest group? And then working with these organizations to get more involved. So full members can nominate 2 people and they can vote. Candidate members can nominate 2 people, however, they cannot vote, but they can participate in projects. So as you will see on the slide, there is a contact email for Fiona Waters. Please reach out, get involved, because in order to make a difference, we need to participate. We need to be the change that we want to see in this world. Thank you. Fiona.
Marina, well done. Thank you so much. Great. So indeed, we are an international representation from around the globe, and we're delighted to have attendees from across the globe coming and joining us today at our Retina International Youth Conference. We'd like to thank everyone in the Americas, over in the US, Canada, South America, who are joining us at very early hours in the morning. And of course, on the other side of the world, where we have people joining us from Japan, Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand, thank you for joining us on giving us your evenings to be with us today. So a universal and international issue that Retina International tackles every day is that around genetic testing and the timely and equitable access to genetic testing. This is something that we believe young people should have timely and equitable access to. And as such is a strong theme today and was chosen as the theme for session 1, where we will be having a panel discussion. I'm delighted to pass over now to Jess McQueen. Jess is a member of our Retina International Youth Council, who will be leading this panel discussion on genetic testing. Jess, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Fiona.
Ready to go when you are.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the first section of the conference, all about genetic testing. There is an urgent need for equitable access to affordable genetic testing for inherited retinal degenerations on a global level. IRDs are actionable conditions, and without access to genetic testing services, patients live with inaction. Retina International and its members on all continents believe there is an urgent need for the disparity in genetic testing and counselling services to be addressed. In this session, we will explore the reasons for genetic testing, the role of genetic counselling, and welcome the personal stories and reflections from panellists who have undergone the genetic testing process. My name is Jess McQueen, and I am a representative of the Retina International Youth Council, as well as a member of Retina New Zealand. I was lucky enough to have been tested to find out exactly what gene of retinitis pigmentosa I have inherited. I am joined today by 4 incredible panellists. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on this panel today. First up, I would like to introduce Ms. Michelle Glaze. Michelle is the Associate Director of Professional Outreach for the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Michelle joined the Foundation in February 2019 after 15 years in medical sales. Her passion for this role with the Foundation stems from personal challenges with vision loss due to retinitis pigmentosa. Next, we are delighted to be welcoming Kari Branham. Kari is a clinical assistant professor and director of Ophthalmic genetic counselling at the University of Michigan's Kellogg Eye Center. She received her master's degree in genetic counselling from the University of Michigan in 2002 and has been providing genetic counselling services to patients affected with inherited retinal degeneration since that time. And now a warm welcome to Kirill Baybarin. Kirill is joining our panel from Moscow, Russia. He is a founder and president of the non-profit organization Look to See, supporting patients with inherited retinal degenerations. He is a father to a 16-year-old boy with Stargardt disease. Kirill will be sharing his experience with genetic testing. And finally, we are welcoming Shaini Saravanamuthu. Shaini lives in Montreal, Canada as an accountant. In 2011, she was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa. Having known in her family with the disease, Shaini was determined to go through the genetic testing process. She'll be sharing her story with us today. A quick note to our audience, please remember to note down any questions you may have for our panelists, as there will be time at the end to have these questions answered. Press Alt and Y on your keyboard and we'll get to as many of you as we can at the end. So without further ado, let's jump into our discussion around genetic testing. Michelle, you've prepared a presentation for us today. Would you share that with us now?
Jess, can you put up my slides for me?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle, they're coming.
Hi, thank you.
You go.
Great, thank you so much. Jess, I appreciate the introduction and thank you to everyone who's joining today. I'm Michelle Glaze, and as Jess mentioned, I joined the Foundation Fighting Blindness in 2019 professionally. My role in professional outreach enables me to connect with eye care professionals in the United States. And my role is to educate them about all of the resources available to patients with inherited retinal disease, one of which is genetic testing. While I'm an employee of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, I was clinically diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa in 2004. So what I do in professional outreach, I am very passionate about. Like many of you in the audience, I clearly remember that moment that I was diagnosed, and I remember how scared and frightened and just disconcerted I felt about it. I spent many years in trying to deny my disease. I tried to ignore it away, wish it away. And in 2011, I came to realize that I really was feeling the impact of my vision loss. In 2011, I hired my first round of drivers, and at that time I was in the pharmaceutical industry and was traveling all day, every day, and could no longer do that. So I had to find a way to adjust and adapt. It was also in 2011 that I discovered the Foundation Fighting Blindness as a patient, as a constituent. And I was attracted to the foundation because of the mission of the organization to drive research to find treatments and cures for blinding retinal diseases. In 2011, I formed a Vision Walk team. Vision Walk is a flagship fundraiser that the Foundation Fighting Blindness hosts. And it was the first time that I ever stepped out and said, I have vision loss. I felt very empowered. I wanted to do something. And that was the way that I first got involved with the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Today, I want to talk about the foundation. I want to talk about some of the resources, genetic testing, and some other things that I think are important for patients with inherited retinal diseases to be aware of. You can advance the slides, please. So the Foundation Fighting Blindness has been around for 50 years. We are actually celebrating our 50-year anniversary in September. And the mission, as I said, is to drive research to find treatments and cures for blinding retinal diseases. Over the last 50 years, the foundation has grown to be the largest private funder of retinal degenerative disease research in the world. and the organization has raised over $816 million towards the mission. The foundation funds a variety of different types of research projects, lab, translational research. We fund a variety of clinical trials and have formed a RD fund to support this effort. The foundation offers career development awards to professionals who are looking to care for patients with inherited retinal disease. We fund natural history studies. And today I want to spend some time also talking about the patient registry and genetic testing program that the Foundation Fighting Blindness has developed. The goal here is to eradicate the entire spectrum of retinal degenerative diseases. This includes retinitis pigmentosa, Stargardt disease, Usher syndrome, LCA, and many others. Now, the foundation does offer a variety of resources for patients, and a lot of information can be found on our website, which is fightingblindness.org. There's information for individuals who have just been diagnosed, information about clinical research, educational videos and webinars about all the different inherited retinal diseases and clinical research that's underway. So I would encourage you to check out our website if you're interested in learning more, and you can find a lot of the information that I'm talking about today on our website. Next slide, please. So genetic testing, why is genetic testing important for individuals with an inherited retinal disease? There are several reasons. First, it can confirm or change a clinical diagnosis. With the inherited retinal diseases, many can look alike. I recently interfaced with a family who has a little boy who was diagnosed clinically with retinitis pigmentosa. After he got genetic testing done, it was found that he actually had LCA, and that was very powerful for the family. They were able to connect with other families, other children who have the same genetic mutation. They've gotten involved in a support group. So it's really important to confirm that clinical diagnosis because sometimes that will change. It also provides more accurate prognosis for patients. So patients have a better understanding of what to expect with their vision loss over time. It can also confirm inheritance patterns and risk factors for other family members. I received genetic testing in 2015, and the reason that I got genetic testing done is because I have a little boy, and I wanted to know if there was a chance that he might be impacted by my disease and have RP. When I got genetic testing done, I had one pathogenic mutation in RP1, and I also had one variant of unknown significance in RP1, and I'll talk a little bit more later about why it was important for me to not only receive genetic testing, but also genetic counseling as a result of my genetic diagnosis. Also, genetic testing can potentially qualify patients for clinical trials or the first and only FDA-approved gene therapy that is currently out there and available for patients with mutations in RPE65. This gene therapy is called Luxturna. And I think that this is a really important aspect to the whole program. With the Foundation Fighting Blindness, we really want to provide patients with support and guidance, but most importantly, we want to provide hope. And clinical trials and potential treatments, actual treatments out there now, they really do instill a vast amount of hope for individuals who are impacted. And I think it's really important to note that. There are currently over 40 clinical trials underway, and this is on a global level with inherited retinal diseases. And many of these do require a genetic diagnosis if a patient is interested in getting involved. Now, these clinical trials range in gene-specific therapies, but there are also a lot of gene-agnostic approaches out there and available. So there are some research projects underway right now that have implications for a multitude of individuals, and it's not specific to one gene. For example, there are some neuroprotective strategies, there are optogenetic approaches, there are stem cell treatments, just to name a few. So genetic diagnosis is important, and there are a lot of things underway that can potentially be helpful for the future. Next slide, please. So in order to move therapies from the lab into FDA approval, patients are needed for clinical trials. And in order for the Foundation Fighting Blindness to move things along and drive the research forward, genetic testing is something that was recognized to be very important. So the Foundation Fighting Blindness created a genetic testing program. It's called the Retina Tracker Open Access Program. And this is truly a best-in-class partnership between Blueprint Genetics, Informs DNA, and the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Now, I do want to note that this no-cost genetic testing option is available only to patients in the United States who have been clinically diagnosed with an inherited retinal disease. And it does require that patients have not been tested with another program of more than 32, or another panel of more than 32 genes over the last 4 years. Blueprint Genetics offers the Retina Tracker panel. It is a 322 gene panel. So it is very broad and does capture many of the inherited retinal diseases. Informed DNA is our no-cost genetic counseling partner. And I actually have some experience with Informed DNA. I received genetic counseling through this program. They are very knowledgeable and well-versed, and genetic counseling is very important so that patients understand what the genetic test results mean and what the implications can be for the future. As I mentioned, I had a pathogenic mutation in RP1. I had a variant of unknown significance in RP1. What that meant for me is that I didn't know whether my RP was recessive or dominant. And that was really important for me to understand what the impact would be for my son. Through my genetic counseling at Informed DNA, they were able to uncover that when I got my genetic testing done and there was a variant of unknown significance, there had been further research done. So I had genetic testing in 2015, met with the counselor at Informed DNA in 2019. That variant of unknown significance had been reclassified to likely pathogenic. With that reclassification, with my family history, with my genetic testing results, they were able to share with me that my RP is recessive. And what that meant for my family is that my son had little to no chance of having RP. So that was a huge relief. And I can't underscore how important genetic counseling is. And I'm looking forward to Kari's presentation on this. But this program really does help patients and families to understand and manage their inherited retinal disease. It helps to drive clinical research for patients with inherited retinal disease, and it also gets patients on a path towards clinical trials and potential treatments. Now, the third leg of the Retina Tracker Open Access Program is the Retina Tracker Patient Registry, and that's offered through the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Next slide, please. So the Retina Tracker Registry is a global registry. This is available to anyone who has been clinically diagnosed with an inherited retinal disease, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's a free platform, it's secure, it's very easy to use. This is a way for individuals with an inherited retinal disease to really raise their hand and be seen by the research community. Researchers can potentially recruit patients for clinical trials, but this is a confidential platform. So what happens is if you go online and you create a record, there is an alphanumeric code that is associated with your record. So if researchers, biotech, pharmaceutical companies are looking for individuals for potential clinical trials, they can look at that registry and they'll receive that alphanumeric code. From there, they would contact the Foundation Fighting Blindness and identify that record number. And then the foundation would contact the patient and let them know that there is an interest in being recruited or having a discussion about a clinical trial that's underway. So everything is patient controlled. The information that's entered, whether or not there's an interest in pursuing clinical research, but it is a platform through which research can be pushed through the pipeline. And it's a way for the research community to find patients so that we can get to treatments and cures for the inherited retinal diseases. Currently, we have about 16,000 active or useful registrants in the My Retina Tracker registry. This slide needs to be updated a little bit. We've had more than 150 requests for access by researchers and companies, but it is a resource that they do use to identify patients. If you'd like more information about the My Retina Tracker registry, you can go to myretinatracker.org. Next slide, please. You can also visit our website at fightingblindness.org. And if there are any specific questions about the Foundation Fighting Blindness, our genetic testing program, or anything related to the inherited retinal diseases that I can help with, my email is mglaze@fightingblindness.org. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Jess?
As we come to the panel discussion, Kari, I will come to you first.
Sorry,
Perhaps
Jess.
first, hi.
May I just
could you-
interject? Hi, I'm just
Oh, sorry.
wondering if Kirill is in the audience and if they could make themselves known to us by raising your hand. If you could press Alt-Y. Kirill, if you're there, could you press Alt-Y to raise your hand or make yourself known in the audience? No worries. Thank you, Jess. Please continue.
Okay. Okay, Kari, could you please share with us what genetic testing is and an overview of the process, please?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your meeting. As I hope you'll hear from me today, you know, I think genetic counseling and genetic testing are super important to patients affected with inherited retinal disease. And I know Michelle set that up very nicely, talking about kind of the reasons why we do genetic testing. I am going to take a couple minutes now to just explain a little bit more about kind of what genetic testing is and the process that patients can go through to obtain genetic testing. So really, kind of simply put, genetic testing is a process for understanding what has caused someone to be affected with a genetic condition. To understand a little bit more about this, it's kind of important to get a refresher in genetics, which many people have studied in school, may not have thought about it all that much, but genes are really the basic units of heredity. They're made up of DNA and passed on from our parents. We all have about 25,000 different genes, and these genes are basically responsible how our bodies function as humans. When genetic testing is done, the lab works to understand what gene is not working properly and what gene is responsible for a person to be affected with a genetic condition, such as RP, Stargardt, Usher syndrome, or other inherited retinal condition. Out of those about 25,000 different genes, researchers have identified around 270 to 300 different genes that have identified as a cause of disease for patients that are affected with inherited retinal disease. Genetic testing is something that's usually ordered by a healthcare professional, such as an ophthalmologist, genetics doctor, or a genetic counselor. In pretty much all cases, except for some, there is some genetic testing that is directly sent we call it direct to consumer testing, where you can get your ancestry done or something like that. Typically, genetic testing has to be ordered by a healthcare professional. When the testing is performed, a patient will give a sample. Usually this is a blood sample, but it can be something like a saliva sample or a cheek swab of the inside of your cheek. The lab will extract the DNA from that sample and analyze specific genes of interest in a lab. To identify what is the genetic cause of disease, the lab basically compares the DNA from a person affected with an inherited retinal disease to a normal or reference sequence, so someone who's not affected to retinal disease. And they're looking for any difference. They're looking for any changes in the DNA, which will impact that gene and cause the gene to not work properly. This change is something, it may be called a mutation. As Michelle had mentioned, it's something that may be called a pathogenic variant as well. Those basically mean the same thing, pathogenic variant and mutation. They mean that the gene is impacted in a way that is not working properly and will be responsible or will cause a disease. So while that lab portion of the genetic testing, so taking a sample and trying to identify mutations causing disease, is pretty much the same universally, there definitely will be differences in the testing around the world. And I did want to touch on that a little bit because I know we do have an international audience here. And I've been working with genetic testing in the US for a long time. I have a lot of familiarity with that. And from talking to people, talking to other researchers, talking to patients in different places, I know that there are big differences in things like the availability of this test. I'm not an expert in all genetic testing practices in all countries, but I do have some idea about the differences that I've heard. So I wanted to kind of touch on those to help people understand how the process differs around the world. So these differences in testing may simply be the availability of the testing. Genetic testing labs exist in many, many different countries, but there are some countries where they have little or no genetic testing labs available. What that means is if a patient is going to have genetic testing in some countries, they'll need to have the sample sent out to a different country. Sometimes that does cause problems because my understanding is that some countries the government will have regulations in which samples may not be sent out of their home country. So that definitely can be a challenge. Another kind of difference that we see is the type of test that's offered within a lab. So I mentioned that there are around 270, 300 different inherited retinal disease genes, but some different genetic tests that are done. Some will test for just a small subset of genes. Sometimes that may be for a specific diagnosis, maybe only testing for RP or only testing for Stargardt disease or only testing for Usher syndrome, but not testing for all of them together. Some panels do that. They test across all of the different genes. And the reason for that is very much what Michelle had touched on, that we can see a lot of overlap in the different diagnoses, the different genes that can cause people to be affected with different conditions. And because of that, some of the labs will do testing across large panels of genes for all of the different genes that are known to cause a particular condition. There can also be, there's other differences in the labs. Sometimes these may be commercial genetic testing labs. That would be something such as Blueprint Genetics. There's a number of other commercial labs around the world that do genetic testing. Or there may be labs which are research labs and associated with things like large hospitals or associated with a university. There can be differences in the cost of the testing between countries. In some cases, it may be that the patient will be responsible for, or their insurance may be responsible for the cost of genetic testing, and it sometimes can be very expensive. In other places, there may be government funds or research funds that can support the cost of the testing. As Michelle mentioned, we're fortunate in the US to have the genetic testing program set up through Foundation Fighting Blindness, in which the genetic testing can be done at no cost. And just to kind of conclude, I really do hope that through more awareness of organizations such as Retina International and like the Foundation Fighting Blindness, there'll be more awareness of the importance of genetic testing for patients affected with inherited retinal disease, and hopefully the availability of this genetic testing will spread as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kari, for that information. Shaini, could you share with us a bit about your journey to genetic diagnosis with RP?
Yes. Hi, how are you? So my name is Shaini and I'm from Montreal and I'm 31 years old right now. I was diagnosed with RP just as soon as I turned 21. So that was in 2011. So the beginning part of that, I just knew I had RP, but I'm also from a South Asian community. So it's not a community that really talks about illness or disabilities. So it was kind of hard to like figure out if anyone in my family even had this or even anyone spoke about it, if they just kind of hid it. And medical files and stuff aren't as readily available back home for me to get access to. So that was kind of a struggle. So in 2016, when my specialist had recommended that he wanted me to do the genetic testing panel for his research. So like Kari said, I just had to do a blood sample, and that was actually tested against 80 identified genes for RP. So unfortunately, my results came back and my genetic counselor sat me down. We were talking and I didn't have any match to any of the mutations. So it was kind of like discouraging, but at the same time, I was like, okay, so for now, I just had to be patient and hope. And she told me, like, you know, they are working on a lot. Science is ever evolving. So just to be patient. Fast forward 2018 February, my genetic counselor did call me back and said, hey, we can test you against about 280 now. So we do want you to come back in, get tested. And since this is through my ophthalmologist, my RP specialist, who is also doing research, and I live in Canada also, so I didn't have to pay anything. So I gave in a blood sample and it actually got sent to the States. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a lab somewhere, I believe in Texas. So there was about 60 days for me to find out my results. So I got tested in February 2018, found out 2 months later. So like right in the middle of COVID. So it was a bit of a delay, but I did find out. But once again, unfortunately, I did not find any match, but she was able to tell me that I didn't test for Usher and that my gene was also recessive. So if I were to have kids, there would be a very low chance that I would pass them over to my kid. But also a good thing about genetic testing and having access to a genetic counselor is like, you get these results and I personally have no idea how to read them. So it's great to have a genetic counselor who kind of like walks you through it. And like, you know, like when you have questions, she was able to address everything and like just kind of calm me down, even though I didn't have a match, and kind of reassure me like not to stress. And like us being in this community, like you do know that's like people are working so hard, and just knowing that 2-year difference, how there was so much like more to test against, just gives me hope that maybe in another 2 years, I'll get another call and they'll be able to identify more. So it's just, even though I don't know what I have, it's just good to know that there's people working in the background to make sure to find out a bigger picture. And I hope one day I will find out, just to like get a better idea, just because like no one in my family has any sort of retinal or any sort of eye condition. So it's kind of like, as my researcher and all of them say, I'm a guinea pig in this world because I just don't test against anything. So and I know like when I did get my results, I was told that someone is interested in taking another blood sample against me for another research, just because I keep not testing against anything and there's no family history. And also another good thing is that when I do decide to have kids and when I know who my partner is, he's also able to come in and get genetic testing done for free, as it's under family planning. So which is kind of nice also to know, like I can have that resource and to be able to know that like as a couple we'll have a better idea of if my partner has anything, or if us together will pass any other eye diseases down to our children. So
Great, wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story, Shaini.
no problem. No problem.
Okay, Kirill, thank you for joining us. You've gone through genetic testing in Russia. Could you share a bit about your experience? And are there any parts of Shaini's story that contrast with yours?
Hello, everybody. I'm a head of patient organization in Russia. And as a head, I know many patient stories. And I would like to share with you our common view of situation in Russia. In a few words, it becomes better. But we still have 3 problems. First, low awareness, let's say, low genetic awareness of ophthalmologists and retina specialists. The most common advice to patients a few years ago were, I don't care about genetic testing, there is no cure at this moment. Or you can do it if you like it, but there is no real reason for this. Second, low access to genetic specialists. We have only one government public genetic center in Moscow and a few private health centers. and list of waiting to public genetic center about 6 months. And not in general, genetic testing is not covered by public insurance, just some options. And a third problem is lack of counseling. The most common situation when a patient get results with letters and numbers, and that's it. He understand what he has a disease, he has an inherited condition, but what he or she should do with it, no information. But last year, government launched a new foundation to help children with a rare disease. And after that, interest to genetic testing grows. And government launched some programs for genetic testing, but not for vision conditions. Second good news, new technical university in Russia, in Sochi, got one special grants for genetic testing and development of treatment, including vision conditions. And third, after launch of Luxturna in Russia and activity of Novartis, they launched some programs for patients. And as I said in the beginning of my small presentation, situation becomes better. And I hope that next few years, it may be not perfect, but maybe wait time between diagnosis of ophthalmologist and genetic testing should be 1 month or 2, not more. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Kirill. Michelle, in your presentation, you speak about the why of genetic testing for those living with an IRD. Could you tell us about the importance of genetic testing in the context of advocacy and retinal research?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? I'm having some, it was breaking up.
Oh, no worries, sorry, yeah, sure. In your presentation, you spoke about the why of genetic testing for those living with an IRD. Can you tell us about the importance of genetic testing in the context of advocacy and retinal research?
Well, yes, there are a variety of clinical trials underway in the inherited retinal disease space, and many of those trials do require, most of them require a genetic testing result in order to participate as a patient or as an individual with an inherited retinal disease. Gene-specific therapies, gene replacement therapies, there are many trials that are going on right now in the field, and most of those are for one specific genetic mutation. So in order for a patient or an individual to participate, the identification of that particular gene is vital. You know, there are, as I mentioned before, a variety of research projects underway that are not gene specific, but even then it's important to have a genetic testing result so that you know, the researchers know exactly what's going on and the specific disease is identified. So you know, that's why it's so important to get genetic testing in the way of research, is so that, you know, you can know exactly what's going on from a genetic standpoint and confirm what the clinical diagnosis has been if you've been diagnosed by a physician. And Kari may have some additional information around that would be helpful as well.
Great. So is there anything you'd like to add, Kari?
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. You know, I really think definitely the more we understand about these conditions, so any patients who have genetic testing, it helps the clinicians who do that genetic testing, it helps them to understand. And then if they are participating in broader databases, such as the My Retina Tracker Registry, every person who has genetic testing is something that we can learn from. One of the things that I'm always saying is the more we learn, the less we know. Yes, that's right. Because there's always an exception to the rule. Like I've been doing this for about 20 years, but I'm always surprised at genetic testing results that we get on a patient. So it helps the clinicians from that end to understand more about these diseases and be able to recognize them better. But it also helps the broader research community through some of the large databases that we have to really help to recognize and understand. So definitely it's super important for the patient, but it's helpful for the community overall as well.
Awesome, thank you. So Kari, while you're there, can you share with us a bit about the role of a genetic counsellor in the genetic testing process, and what benefits do you believe the added support of genetic counselling can bring?
Yeah. So I'm super excited actually to hear everybody on the panel speaking highly of genetic counselors and the things that we do as a part of the process. You know, I work in a job where many people have not heard about a genetic counselor. They don't know what one does. So when I tell someone, oh, I'm a genetic counselor, I get kind of blank stares of not knowing exactly what that is. So genetic counselors, we're healthcare professionals. We work as part of a team. In my case, I work specifically in the Department of Ophthalmology. So I work as a part of a team of ophthalmologists, electrophysiologists who do all of the testing in the clinic. We actually have 2 genetic counselors who work there. So we work as a part of a team. And I would say that my role is to kind of work with the patients from the beginning of their diagnosis, continuing on throughout their life. I actually have some patients that I've continued to meet with over 10, 20 years from the time they were children till adults. So initially, working with patients in clinic, helping to gather information about family history, that's a piece of the puzzle for understanding exactly what's going on with them. And then after the physician makes the diagnosis, it will be talking to the patient about that diagnosis. Sometimes the doctors only have 5 or 10 minutes to talk to the patient, whereas my genetic counseling sessions are half hour to an hour long. They're definitely longer sessions, taking the time to talk about the diagnosis. We also will work with patients to arrange the genetic testing. So finding a lab that can do the testing, understanding if there's different programs that they may be eligible for the testing, talking to them about payment. Is it something that they can participate in a genetic testing program in which the cost is covered? Do we have to think about payment? Do we have to think about insurance coverage? So walking through that process of arranging the testing and actually sending it to the lab. And then when we do get the results back, I think both Michelle and Shaini had mentioned, you know, there can be complexities with understanding the results of the testing. I think part of the job that I have is part of detective for figuring out exactly what's going on, but then interpreting that information for the patient. It can be really complex information and not easy for the patient to understand, not always easy for the physician to understand either. So helping understand that information, understanding what implications there may be for other family members. Sometimes there can be as high as a 50% risk for other members of the family. Sometimes it's a very low risk, less than a 1% chance. Also, we do work and provide support for our patients. So I'll work when I have a patient in the clinic, talk to them about different resources. So are there government training resources, vocational resources, low vision resources, support resources, and therapists? All of that kind of falls under what we do. And also putting patients in touch of different clinical treatment trials that may be out there that they may be eligible for. So looking forward in the future. As I mentioned, I sometimes work with patients for, 5, 10, 20 years. And so very much the story that Shaini was talking about, how At one time, the results were negative. Sometimes we can do testing on broader panels, and sometimes we can find after many years, or as Michelle mentioned, sometimes there needs to be a reinterpretation of those results. So we can also help with that information. Having said that, I do, and again, acknowledging the international crowd that we have, I do understand that genetic counseling is not available in all countries. You know, there are a fair number of genetic counselors in general in the States, and there's many in Canada, and I know Europe, there are many as well. Many other countries, the availability is not quite there. In the US, we have thousands of genetic counselors. Some countries may have only a small handful of genetic counselors who may not be specifically trained in ophthalmology. There are around 70 or so genetic counselors that I kind of have a listserv group of genetic counselors who work in ophthalmology. So there are 60 or 70 who work in ophthalmology, but that's around the world. So that's not too many for the whole world. But this is something that, again, I do hope for some of these things like Kirill was talking about, that through this awareness, the importance of having genetic counseling, it's definitely an important part of the process, and we hope that there's additional awareness and additional genetic counseling available for all of these patients.
Wonderful, thank you, Kari. I definitely agree, it's very important. Okay, Kirill and Shaini, we have a global audience of young people here today listening in, and no doubt impacted by what you've shared with us today. Do you have any parting words of wisdom or advice for young people living with retinal disease today around genetic testing?
I guess I would just say not to lose hope. Like in my case, yes, like I haven't been identified, but like Kara was saying, yes, like my blood work didn't come up with any match, but if more and more people get tested and say they find a pool of us who tend to have like the same blood work, maybe that can lead to another research. So I know, as Kirill was saying, a lot of people say like, oh, what's the point? There is no cure. We might not know what our results can help discover. So just be open to that possibility. And also, if you've never heard of genetic testing or your doctor hasn't spoken about it, I guess what I used to do is every year be like, hey, are there more genes? Are there more genes for me to get? So always poke, I guess, and find out. So just always ask those questions. There's no dumb questions. There's never a wrong time to ask those kinds of questions, like, can I go get tested now? Is it available? You never know when the time will come and for your genetic counselor or your doctor to tell you to go ahead. And I guess just always have open-ended questions. Like, you never know who you'll meet and what resources they might have to help you. So always like these kinds of conferences always helps those discover things that we might not have in our country that another country might be able to help us with. So always have that open mind and just don't lose hope. In 2 years, they were able to identify 200 more genes in my case. So just don't lose hope and just keep thriving. Just don't lose hope.
As a father of a boy with Stargardt disease, I've realized that it's not a disaster to get Stargardt disease, but it's a kind of job. It's a job to live with this disease, and everybody should teach different aspect of this life. Not only genetic testing, but technical support, some optical devices, and some tips how to live with this. And I wish everybody to be positive, to be strong, and just do this job.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shaini and Kirill. Okay, thank you everyone who's spoken. We will now open up to our audience for questions. Remember to put your hand up if you haven't already.
You can raise your hand by pressing Alt and Y on your keyboard, or simply unmute yourself. I see Jane. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I actually had a question for Kari. I was just wondering if sort of genetic counselling, I didn't realize it was sort of an open sort of field. Did you choose to go into retina specifically, or did it sort of happen by accident?
Yes. So I actually, you get to hear my life story. I'll be really brief though. When I graduated from college, that was in 1999, I knew I wanted to go into the field of genetic counseling. It's a master's degree. In our country, it's a master's degree. Other countries, it's a certificate program. There's different ways of doing training, but I wanted to go into the field of genetic counseling, knowing the programs were competitive. I decided to work for a couple of years, and there was actually an opening at the Kellogg Eye Center as a research assistant working with genetic studies of age-related macular degeneration. And so I worked at that for 2 years before I went, before I applied to grad schools. So I was here for the genetics, and it just happened to be in ophthalmology. And then when I graduated with my master's degree in genetic counseling, it just so happened that there was an opening at Kellogg for a genetic counselor. So I started there, and here I am 20 years later. So it's interesting though. The field keeps growing. Where we've gone from that time to now is just, it's amazing. So it's always interesting.
Is it Shafi Ahmed? You've got your hand up.
Hello, distinguished speakers. I have a question specific to genetic testing in regards to retina or the diseases related to retina. That my question is, what are the testings, or what kind of testings are we doing to diagnose diseases or problems related to retina? That's all. Thank you.
Jess, do you want me? I can answer. Is that okay?
Oh, sure. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Please go ahead.
So, you know, there are, I think I'm going to be able to answer your question. So just let me know if it's what you're looking for. So there are many different panels. So a panel is just a large number of genes that are all tested for at the same time. So these would be, you have to consider, and if you're talking about inherited retinal diseases. So there are other conditions that can affect the retina that are not considered to be genetic in the same way as like retinitis pigmentosa, Stargardt's disease, choroideremia. In those particular conditions, there are mutations in one gene which causes a person to be affected with that condition. There are other categories of diseases like age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, which also affect the retina, but they're not exactly the same. And there's not the same sort of testing is recommended for those categories. But you can, there are many different labs that offer testing, many in the States, and there are some labs outside of the United States as well that offer these panels that are specifically for inherited retinal diseases.
Great, thank you.
Jess, I have a question here from Ari, so I'm going to invite Ari to unmute in case they want to ask the question.
Wonderful, thank you, Ari.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Cool. So my question was, is there anywhere and this is to the entire panel, I suppose, is there anywhere I as a patient can find out research into IRDs in my specific country, whatever that may be, that I might be eligible to participate in because I can't necessarily access a genetic test of my own volition for financial reasons, for example?
I'd be happy to start. There are a couple of different resources that come to mind where you can identify clinical trials. The Foundation Fighting Blindness website, fightingblindness.org, does have a list of all of the inherited retinal disease clinical trials that are underway, and that is an international list. We do have research projects that are underway I can think of right now in France, the UK, Netherlands. So you can look on the clinical trials section of the Foundation Fighting Blindness website. There is also another resource, clinicaltrials.gov, so clinicaltrials.gov. And there you can do searches to find research projects that are underway for a variety of different conditions, but certainly the inherited retinal diseases as well. So those are two that come to mind that you can tap into to learn more about the clinical research that's going on.
I would second what Michelle said. Those are the two ones that I would generally recommend. The only other caveat that I would go along with that is, so I'm sure that what's on the Foundation Fighting Blindness website, they've kind of vetted everything that they're going to have on their website. In regard to the clinicaltrials.gov, I think most of those are fine as well. But I think there are, out on the internet, you're going to hear about clinical trials. Any clinical trial that you were considering, I would always recommend bringing information about that trial back to your ophthalmologist to talk to them about it. Generally, for a clinical trial, that's not something that you should have to be paying for. That's something that the funds would be covered by pharmaceutical companies, whoever, or sometimes university funds, whoever supporting that research. But I have heard of patients, particularly some things with stem cells, that there are people out there who are doing things, and if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Things like, there's stem cell researchers, and actually some of these have appeared on the clinicaltrials.gov website, but they basically will say, whatever your problem is, if you have multiple sclerosis, if you have a spinal cord injury, if you have retinitis pigmentosa, we can fix all of those. Those are the types of trials that I would be weary of. So there's a lot of good ones out there, but definitely talking to your ophthalmologist, your local doctor, about any trials that you were considering, I'd recommend that.
Very good point, Kari.
Wonderful, thank you. Next we'll come to Jenna. Thank you, Jenna.
Hey guys, hey from New York. So in my family, my father has had genetic testing done and they were unable to identify the gene, I suppose, I think is the terminology. And you know, so what is the outlook for being able to identify really the specific gene? Because I know that not everybody, he has RP, for example. You know, you can't always identify what gene it is. What's the outlook for kind of closing the information gap there?
It's a great question. I would say if we look across for a lot of the larger commercial panels, and this is again depending on what he was tested for. If he was tested for 10 genes versus 300 genes, there's a big difference there in what he was tested for. But on the large panels that we're seeing, we're able to detect the genetic cause 60% of our patients. The remaining are negative or inconclusive, meaning the genetic cause wasn't necessarily identified. But new genes are being identified all the time. What we say, and this is kind of an arbitrary thing, but I actually think it sounds similar to Shaini's experience, we're kind of arbitrarily saying about 5 years to revisit it, depending on the size of the original panel. Like if we test someone on a large panel now, we say, okay, we're going to revisit this in about 5 years. And the reason for that is new genes are being discovered all the time. A lot of the new genes that are being discovered now, it may be a mutation found in a gene in 1 or 2 families in a remote country, and not a lot of other people that have it. So they're going to be minimal contributors to the overall cause of disease, but definitely we think revisiting it, but it's just not something that needs to be done right away. But it depends a lot on what he was tested for originally, how long ago it was. Technology is improving, the number of genes are all improving over time. So definitely something to be revisited, but it depends on a lot on what the testing was. But we're finding new genes are being found all the time. So
thank you.
And I would just add, in my experience, my personal experience, I was tested genetically in 2015, and one of the mutations was not identified. It was a variant of unknown significance. 4 years later, when I met with a genetic counselor, that had been reclassified because there had been more information gathered. So it does happen, and 4 years isn't terribly long. So, you know, it happens more quickly than you might anticipate. I would just add that in New York, there is a no-cost option, and it's through a company called Invitae. So if I would say that, as Kari mentioned, you know, identifying what type of test was offered and done, it would be worth researching to see if there might be an option out there that would yield a different result, or an option that provides a greater number of genes that are being tested by the panel. So I would ask some questions and perhaps revisit that if that's an option.
Definitely, thank you.
Thank you. Fiona.
Hi, this is more of a question of curiosity for Shaini and probably Kirill as well, but how easy or difficult did you find it to get information on genetic testing in your regions?
So for me, it wasn't like I honestly had heard it through the grapevine. And then so I think in 2014 or 15, I had asked my RP specialist and he was like, oh, it's in the works. I'll contact you when I can have you get tested. So it was like my yearly visit. I had gone in and he gave me the contact information from my genetic counselor. And he said, it's time for you to get tested. And so that was in 2016. So it was 5 years after I got diagnosed. And so that's when I got tested for the first panel. And then 2 years later, the genetic counselor had reached out to me when there was more genes to test against. So in my case, I guess I didn't really have to work hard, I guess, in that case. I just had to poke my RP specialist in the beginning to like ask, because I did read forums and stuff before, people talking about it. So I wanted to know when I can find out my genetic testing results. So that's what I was saying before, like if this is like the first time that you've been hearing about it, definitely bring it up to your healthcare professional and they might be able to guide you. And in Canada, just like the US, I had also gone to the Fighting Blindness Canada to kind of get more information, where they brought me towards the Retina tracker where I had created my profile as well. So once you get your results, you can kind of upload it there, which kind of helps everyone else have a bigger picture of things. So to conclude, it was pretty, I guess, accessible for me in Canada in the sense that my RP specialist was able to help me guide me towards my genetic counselor.
Hi, Fiona. In my personal case, it was not very difficult for me because I am a medical doctor. I don't work with eyes. I work with another part of human body. I'm a urologist. But it was clear for me that my son and our family must be tested. For other patients, you know, the most problem from my point of view in my region, that it's not clear recommendations for or guidelines for ophthalmologists, and no clear way for patients after he is diagnosed by a retina specialist. So mostly patients find information that they should be tested in Facebook, patient sites, or from other patients, not from doctors.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, that's all the time we have for the session. I'd like to thank again our speakers, Michelle, Kari, Kirill, and Shaini, and thank you to all who have been here for this discussion. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting.
Thank you all so much to Jess, our amazing host, to Kirill and Shaini, and to Michelle and Kari. Really fantastic and energetic discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope all of you did too. So that brings us to the close of our very first session. I think what was a really strong theme throughout that was this idea of hope and not losing hope. And this is something we hope to carry throughout this event, and also something we want to reflect in social media. So it's no coincidence that we chose today, August 12th, to run this conference, because today is, of course, International Youth Day, and we want to celebrate hope for the young people in our community. So we want to know, what gives you hope? You'll see here we have our lovely Jess and Shaini, who you just met, and Jane as well, who have shared with us what gives them hope. Where Jess hopes to drive again, Shaini finds hope in our community, and Jane finds hope in the advancements in research that we have. So what we want you, our young people in our community, to do is to do something like this. Tell us what gives you hope. Write it down on a piece of paper and post it to us on our Instagram or Twitter. We are at Retina_int with the hashtags International Youth Day, hashtag ORIYC 2021, and hashtag Eye on the Future. And if you make sure to tag us, we'll be sure to reshare you in return. So Kirill mentioned there the importance of technical supports as well, which very conveniently brings us into our session 2, which will be on access and enablement and focus on assistive and enabling technologies as well. First, we will have a short comfort break. So we will meet back in just under 15 minutes. So it is 12:17 here in Ireland, or 13:17 CET. And we will be back here in 13 minutes to resume this really fantastic session where we discuss all about access and enablement for our community. In the meantime, I hope you find some nice comfort, get a drink, short walk around, and be sure to join in our social media call to action. Thank you all so much, and enjoy your break, and we'll see you soon.